Okay, so I think we will speak in English, huh? Maybe not. Okay, so, oui. Bon, ok, comme vous voulez. On va parler en français. Les francophones sont invités à parler en français. Très bien. Ben, écoutez, je vous souhaite la bienvenue pour cette rencontre de cet après-midi consacrée à la substitution aux importations et à la localisation de la production en Russie. J'aimerais remercier en particulier l'organisateur de cette rencontre, le groupe Schneider, qui était basé à Zurich et qui est très actif en Russie et dans les pays de la CEI concernant justement toute la problématique des échanges, des investissements entre la Suisse et la Russie et la CEI. J'interviens donc en tant que directeur du Club suisse de la presse, puisque vous vous trouvez ici dans les locaux du Club suisse de la presse. Mais j'ai aussi une autre casquette, puisque je suis aussi président de la Chambre de commerce Suisse-Russie et CEI, qui à ce titre, qui est basée à Genève, mais qui regroupe toute la Suisse romande, et plus, puisque c'est une chambre nationale, qui s'occupe des relations économiques bilatérales entre la Suisse, la Russie et les pays de la CEI, et qui, à ce titre, organise de nombreux événements, dont celui-ci avec le groupe Schneider, mais aussi d'autres. La semaine prochaine, à Lausanne, nous accueillerons le ministre des Finances adjoint, M. Likhatchov, avec le Conseil d'État Philippe Lebas. Donc, pour celles et ceux qui sont intéressés à nos activités, n'hésitez pas à nous en faire part. Si vous êtes aussi intéressés à participer au séminaire avec le vice-ministre de l'économie russe vendredi prochain, c'est le 23 septembre au Beau Rivage à 17h. Vous pouvez toujours me le signaler, nous vous inviterons avec plaisir. Nous sommes aussi en train d'organiser une délégation économique avec notre ministre d'économie, M. Pierre Maudet, donc le conseiller d'État genevois en charge de l'économie et de la sécurité. Délégation économique en collaboration d'ailleurs avec la Chambre de commerce de Genève et M. Soubilia au Kazakhstan. Alors déjà une trentaine de personnes inscrites. J'ai mis quelques programmes au fond si l'une ou l'autre d'entre vous êtes intéressé à participer à ce voyage d'affaires au Kazakhstan avec M. Maudet. Vous trouverez toutes les indications aussi à la fin. C'est prévu du 15 octobre au 22 octobre. Ce sera une visite à très haut niveau. Nous serons accueillis au niveau du ministériel, voire même par le nouveau Premier ministre, puisque l'ancien vient de changer de poste la semaine dernière. Et puis l'année prochaine, nous envisageons une délégation économique, une délégation d'affaires romande en Russie, avec l'attaché commercial de Russie en Suisse romande, M. Zagriatsky. Nous irons à Moscou et dans une autre région industrielle de Russie, et probablement aussi une visite, mais moins ambitieuse, en Géorgie. Puis enfin, pour vous signaler que notre chambre de commerce est attachée au développement des échanges avec la Russie sous toutes ses formes. Nous ne faisons pas de politique. Par exemple, nous nous opposons catégoriquement aux sanctions économiques qui ont été prises à l'égard de la Russie par les politiques. Nous estimons qu'il s'agit là d'une chose qui pénalise les affaires, et en tant que chambre de commerce, évidemment, nous sommes opposés à cette politique de sanctions. À ce titre, c'est M. Bouzer qui m'a demandé de le signaler. Je fais un peu d'auto-publicité, d'auto-promotion, puisqu'il se trouve que j'ai écrit un livre en français qui s'appelle « Russie-Occident, une guerre de 1000 ans, la russophobie de Charlemagne à la crise ukrainienne », et l'exergue « Pourquoi nous aimons tant détester la Russie », qui vient d'être d'ailleurs traduit en russe. Bon, voilà, Zapad, Russia, enfin, je vous laisse lire pour ceux qui parlent le russe. Mais enfin, ces livres sont à votre disposition si vous le souhaitez. Effectivement, ils suscitent beaucoup d'intérêt en Russie, mais aussi en Italie. Une édition italienne vient de paraître. On est en train de préparer l'édition américaine qui paraîtra à la fin de l'année. L'édition suédoise, je l'ai appris hier, va paraître aussi bientôt. donc en Chine. Voilà, donc c'est un livre qui devrait vous intéresser si vous êtes passionné par la Russie. Alors, je demandais avant de passer la parole à nos amis de signer le livre d'or. So just a signature. It's our golden book. And I will give you a little souvenir from the press club. It's the catalog of a cartoons exhibition we organized last May in Geneva. We have a concert at Victoria Hall on Friday evening with the cartoons. So, yeah, that's for your fun. Okay, just a signature. And dès que Vincent aura signé, je vais lui passer la parole.
Merci.
Vincent Subiliac, qui est donc le directeur adjoint de la Chambre de commerce et d'industrie de Genève. Donc, je vais signer.
Voilà, merci à Guy pour cette partie protocolaire. Ma signature étant désormais dûment apposée sur le livre d'or du lieu qui nous reçoit. Mesdames et messieurs, chers membres de nos chambres respectives, chers amis, c'est un plaisir que de vous accueillir en nombre par cette belle journée ensoleillée dans les locaux du Club suisse de la presse. Et je tiens par là également à adresser mes plus vifs remerciements à son directeur, Guy, qui nous y reçoit. Guy, qui est également, il vous l'aura dit, président de la Chambre de commerce Suisse-Russie, dont j'ai le plaisir d'être fraîchement intégré au Conseil, et j'en suis ravi parce que l'objectif est ici précisément, encore une fois, et cela a été rappelé sans faire de politique, mais encore une fois de faire avancer l'intérêt de nos entrepreneurs vis-à-vis de la Russie, mais également des pays de la CEI. Mais je tiens surtout à remercier le groupe Schneider de nous faire l'amitié de leur présence en terre latine ou romande, et de venir nous entretenir d'une thématique tout à fait pertinente et dont je ne doute pas qu'elle suscitera votre plus vif intérêt. Le groupe Schneider, qui est effectivement bien connu sous ses latitudes et qui prodigue quelques judicieux conseils, et ils ne seront pas de trop, en ces temps dont chacun a bien compris qu'ils étaient économiquement troublés avec la Russie. Tant troublé, mais avec, s'agissant de la Suisse et de la position équilibrée, pourrait-on dire, qu'elle a adoptée, eh bien, des opportunités ou des perspectives de marché qui demeurent tout à fait séduisantes. Et c'est aussi un pari que nous faisons ici sur l'avenir. Les sanctions n'ont pas vocation, nous l'espérons en tout cas, être pérennisés. Et donc, nous entrevoyons, sans disposer bien évidemment de la boule de cristal ni de la baguette magique, mais des jours dont on espère qu'ils seront plus sereins. Et puis, sous l'effet effectivement conjugué des sanctions et de certaines crispations ou d'un resserrement normatif, eh bien, effectivement, l'intérêt qu'il existe pour les entrepreneurs de voir leur production se développer sur territoire russe pour effectivement être en adéquation la plus stricte avec les réglementations applicables. Et c'est ce dont messieurs Bizzi et Jan, que je remercie encore de leur présence, vont nous entretenir. Peut-être d'un mot, et moi aussi à titre parfaitement autopromotionnel, je m'autorise à vous glisser l'une autre parole sur la Chambre de commerce qui est associée, et j'en suis ravi, à l'opération du jour. La Chambre de commerce de Genève a pour vocation de représenter la voix de la communauté des affaires. Elle s'y emploie depuis plus de 150 ans. Nous groupons aujourd'hui environ 2500 membres, représentant dans les grandes lignes 70% des forces vives de la République, avec un double axe. Et si je le dis, c'est parce que je pense que pour celles et ceux qui dans la salle ne seraient pas encore membres de la CCIG, comme on l'appelle, Chambre de commerce et d'industrie de Genève, eh bien, il pourrait s'agir là potentiellement d'une riche idée. La Chambre qui a pour vocation d'intervenir à un double niveau. D'abord macroéconomique, ce sont les conditions cadres, celles-mêmes qui permettent d'assurer la prospérité de notre canton, sur lesquels nous œuvrons, qu'il s'agisse de débats aussi centraux que la mère de toutes les batailles, qui est la réforme de la fiscalité des entreprises, que de problématiques en lien notamment avec la mobilité, ce vieux serpent de lac qui est la traversée du lac précisément pour laquelle nous menons campagne. Il ne s'agit là que de 2 exemples, mais qui témoignent probablement de la vitalité des activités déployées par la Chambre. Et puis, sous l'angle plus microéconomique, la Chambre est là pour accompagner les entrepreneurs dans la croissance de leurs affaires. Et pour une ville comme Genève qui se nourrit de son ouverture au monde, et un pays de manière plus large où 1 franc sur 2 est gagné à l'étranger, y compris en Russie, ou à Genève un habitant sur 2 est d'origine étrangère, eh bien notre ADN est imprégné, si vous voulez, de cette composante internationale. Et à ce titre, nous multiplions les activités en lien avec les juridictions étrangères. Et nous accompagnons, respectivement, nous mettons sur pied un certain nombre de missions économiques. Guy l'a rappelé il y a un instant, et c'est à ce titre que nous participons, ou nous venons en soutien à la Chambre de commerce Suisse-Russie pour la mission économique qui nous mènera au Kazakhstan selon un programme dont Guy nous garantit, et j'y souscris pleinement, qu'il sera prometteur. Mais parmi toute la gamme de prestations que nous livrons, il y a aussi, et ça c'est le quotidien de nos entrepreneurs, la délivrance de tous les documents en lien avec le commerce international. En d'autres termes, si vous avez besoin d'exporter temporairement des montres à destination de la Russie et que vous avez besoin d'un carnet ATA, c'est nos services qui vous le délivreront. Ce même carnet qui est actuellement adopté par une centaine de juridictions, 80 pour être précis, en réalité a été inventé dans les murs même de la Chambre, la Maison de l'économie, aux 4 boulevards du Théâtre. Même chose si vous avez besoin d'un certificat d'origine, eh bien nous sommes, sur délégation des douanes, eh bien l'autorité habilitée à le délivrer. Et puis, j'en passe et des meilleurs, je veux pas, c'est pas le propos du jour, mais puisque je vois dans la salle, et je m'en réjouis, la présence d'une de nos collaboratrices, Disa, qui est en charge de tout ce qui est arbitrage et médiation, la Chambre a aussi pour vocation d'accompagner les entrepreneurs dans le règlement de leurs différends, raison pour laquelle nous avons adopté un règlement d'arbitrage. Genève est le berceau de l'arbitrage et même si on ne souhaite à aucun de nos membres de se retrouver dans une situation de contentieux, eh bien ça arrive et nous serons là aussi pour les encadrer. Voilà un bref aperçu des activités de la CCIG, très complémentaire de celle de la Chambre binationale Suisse-Russie et puis également du groupe Schneider. Je vois M. Bouzer dans la salle qui a été la cheville ouvrière de la manifestation du jour. Je lui adresse encore une fois mes remerciements et j'en ai déjà suffisamment dit sur cette note de collaboration active. Je vous cède la parole. Merci.
Si? OK. Merci beaucoup pour que nous avons la possibilité d'être ici aujourd'hui. Guy, Vincent, merci beaucoup à vous et la Chambre de commerce de Genève et Chambre de commerce Suisse-Russie. Donc, comme mon français n'est pas tellement bien, je continue en anglais. So, today from Schneider Group we have 3 representatives here. Apart from me, there is also my colleague here sitting, Kevin Jan. Kevin Jan is in the St. Petersburg office working with me. He is responsible for business development for the Northwest region and also for whole Russia partly. And then we also have Mark Buser sitting there in the corner, hiding a little bit. He is our representative here in Zurich and in Switzerland, so the first contact point for anybody who is interested in doing business in Russia and in the other CIS countries where Schneider Group is present. And maybe some short words about Schneider Group. We have had our operations running now for 13 years. Started at that time in Moscow. Nowadays we have offices in Moscow, St. Petersburg with around about 350 people, and then we have also an office in Kiev, we have one in Almaty, in Minsk, in Almaty, in Astana, so we are pretty much focusing on the former Soviet Union countries plus also Poland. And we serve our clients in all sorts of let's say, administrative areas all around the business of the client. So that is a lot of consulting in legal, tax, in finance, in accounting, and then we support with import, we do recruiting, we do IT, so quite a lot we can actually do for our clients. So, as a short introduction, let's get to the nitty-gritty, the localization in Russia. So, quickly to our content, a short introduction why we have arrived at the situation as we have it nowadays, yes, with this idea, why this has come up to have this import, this kind of localization, importations, as it is always named in Russian, so changing imports into local production. And then we will go through some legal issues, some laws and decrees. We go through special investment contracts. We go into the requirements, what actually makes a product being considered made in Russia. And we will have a look at some examples of the automotive industry, of the pharmaceutical industry, and then we look at some interesting areas to invest in and some promising branches. Later on, also some practical examples of localization in Russia. And then in the end, if time still allows, we go through some basics of import and certification. So, everybody knows Russia is a country that very much depends on the sales and the price of natural resources. The slide here shows us two graphs. It shows us the price of a Brent, US Brent barrel, and it shows us the development of the gross domestic product of Russia. And we see on this slide that whenever the price of Brent went up, so did the gross domestic product. And when the price of Brent went down, so did gross domestic product. It's all very nice as long as the prices go up. It's not so nice if the prices are going down, and that's what we have seen quite massively the last 2.5 years. What is the result of the situation as we have had it? We have had lots of sales of natural resources from Russia to the European Union, which can be seen on this slide here. On the left side, exports from EU to Russia, right side, export from Russia to the EU. If we see export Russia to the EU, all this red part is oil, gas, mineral oil products. So around about 3/4 of the exports of Russia to the European Union are natural resources. Whereas the other way around, we have the exports from the EU to Russia of machinery, of high value goods, of chemical products, of cars and other vehicles. So much higher valued good with a lot more added value. And if we look at the economic development of the last couple of years, as we see on this slide, we see the blue parts that show us the GDP development, which we see that the last around about 2 years we have been in the minus with negative GDP growth. We see the red graph shows us the investments. The investments have been very high up to 2008, when the last financial crisis came, and then went down massively. But what we can also see on the graph is the investments went up again pretty quickly when the crisis was actually over. The crisis was over pretty quickly. So there were again investments, we again had economic growth. But what we see now around about in the middle, unfortunately I cannot really show you here, we see that the red graph more or less approaches zero or goes into negative area, yeah, the investments graph. So for now, more than 4 years, we have had negative growth in investments, yeah. Where should future growth usually come from? Future growth usually comes from investments. So what does that show us? We probably have a structural problem in the economy. We also see that these problems started a lot earlier than when the sanctions began, what is the green arrow, and the fall in the oil price, the blue arrow. So the underinvestment started a lot earlier. So the problems are not just the oil price, the problem is structural. This graph shows us the real effective exchange rate of the ruble against the most important currencies of the world. That means it's the real effective exchange rate, so it's the exchange rate, the nominal, and it's corrected by the inflation rates. Yes, so Russia usually has quite a high inflation. So if the exchange rate from 1 year to the next year stays on the same level, but the inflation is actually very high, that means on a real basis, the ruble has increased in value. Yes, and this we have seen if we look here at the year around about 2000, 1999, the ruble value has gone up until 2008. Then it fell down massively when there was a first devaluation in the financial crisis, but then again increased quickly in value. And then 2014 again lost massively in value. Well, if such a situation happens, it's all fine as long as productivity growth is the same as the growth of the real effective exchange rate. I've put in on the next slide more or less a bit simplified the growth in productivity, of labor productivity. It has not really increased in the same way as the real effective exchange rate. So there has been a massive gap between the increase in prices in a country and the productivity. That's not actually a very unusual picture if we look at the fact that Russia was actually selling a lot of oil and profiting by the ever-increasing price of oil. So there would always money come in. The country would get more and more expensive, but all the money inflow would support this situation. But what we have seen now in starting 2014, the oil price has dropped and the currency had to devaluate more or less quickly to actually adjust to the new situation. So now we see on the very right side, the real effective exchange rate is a lot closer to where it should be when we look at the productivity development. What does that mean? When the exchange rate on the real term is very, very high, it means local production is too expensive. It's just so simple to import everything. That is the situation that we have had. So this wonderful gentleman, during one of his last days of being the president of Russia, Mr. Medvedev said, we have to improve our investment climate. We have a problem. We want people to invest. And we need good structures. We need a good framework for our economy, like in any other civilized country. And Mr. Medvedev was very right. So the Russian government was setting up a roadmap with lots and lots of plans: simplification of tax administration, simplification of registration of legal entities, of the custom administration, of cadastral registration of real estate, and so on, support of exports, improving of access to energy infrastructure, which had always been a huge problem, improvement of regulatory environment for companies, improvement of competition, better anti-monopoly policies, simplification of access of small and medium-sized entities to tenders, getting the opinion of expert commissions into the policy development, and also simplification of urban planning. Very good plans. And we see in some of these areas, we really see improvements. For instance, when it comes to access to energy infrastructure, a constant problem. Here we have seen that the processes have become a lot easier. We also see that with tax authorities, communication has become easier, so we see quite some positive development. And we also see this in the ranking of doing business of the World Bank, where Russia has constantly moved up in the ranking the last couple of years. However, a bit more has to be done. So the Russian government came up with the industrial policy. What does it mean, industrial policy? Well, there is a law which is named Law on Industrial Policy 488 FZ, which outlines more or less the basics. And then there are quite some decrees and government decisions around. So there is an import substitution program and an import substitution plan. There are several decrees, actually by now lots and lots of decrees on, for instance, healthcare and pharma, machinery, light industries, trade procurement, and so on and so on. There has been set up the idea of special investment agreements. This is what Kevin will afterwards tell more about. And how can actually a product be defined as made in Russia or not made in Russia? So, first, the law on industrial policy. As I said, this is more or less the core, and this is also more or less simple. It just shows us that the government wants to have economic diversification, so to fight the situation as we have seen, as we have had it the last actually a couple of years, 10 years, 20 years, the situation with no local production or too little. It also shows what is the competencies on the federal level, on the regional level. It sets out the general framework in certain industries, and it also guarantees immunity for investors, so when legislation changes in the future, the investors will not be affected negatively. Yeah, the goal is clear. It's to encourage actually local production, to make producers not just export to Russia, but produce in Russia. And the law sets out there should be a clear preference of Russian products, or as Russia is in the Eurasian Economic Union, yes, a preference of products of the Eurasian Economic Union. And there shall be bans and restrictions for goods of foreign origin, and affected sectors by the restricted access of foreign-made goods to public tenders shall be in the very first place automotive, heavy equipment, light industry and pharmaceutical sectors, but there are actually more sectors affected, but that's the focus sectors. So there have been a number of decrees around this law on industrial policy. There has been, for instance, a decree on cars, which says that cars produced in foreign countries should be excluded from tenders. That means state authorities are not allowed anymore to buy imported cars. There is a decree 7901 on light industry products and textile industry. This also says no more foreign goods shall be taken into public tenders. And so there is a decree 1289. It's pharmaceuticals, drugs which are important for life-saving drugs. Here is also the idea that any foreign drug should not be accepted in tender processes if there are the same kinds of drugs produced in Russia. Also with software products, there are quite some steps ahead that only Russian software should be purchased in the future by authorities or by the public. And Russian software not only means produced or programmed in Russia, but actually goes a bit further. It also says the company producing the software should be Russian owned. Yeah? So just putting the people to Russia and program the software there will not really help. And when it comes to IT hardware, we are not yet so far, but we expect that also in the future products from abroad will not be allowed anymore to be purchased by government agencies and by public. So, when this whole program with import substitution started, the Russian government wanted to know from each region what could be the share of the regions to reach the goal of this import substitution. Yes, of this localization. So there was a decree sent out to the governors of the different provinces, of the different oblasts, asking them to go through all the sectors lined out in this decree. We'll get to this on the next slide. And give their opinion on the current status, what is currently the share of import, and what is the potential of share of local production for the future. And then, these are the branches which should be covered by this localization issue. More than 800 products that should be produced mainly in Russia by 2020. Average reduction 50 to 60% of imports. Yes, that's massive. And all in all, it's 18 industries that the Russian government is focusing on. So they received a reply from all the governments, and they set up a list of what products should be localized in what province by what year. So we see here on the slide, for instance, two examples. We see wheel suspensions and we see combustion engines. Currently, wheel suspensions are produced 35% in Russia, and 65% are imported. We see the foreign producers, we also see what are the domestic producers, and then we see the lines import substitution potential, where the governors had to put in, okay, yes, there is potential, no, there is no potential by 2018 or by 2020 or right now, and then reasons for import substitution. Well, the reason is always the same. It's considered a too high share of import. And also interesting, many of these positions, there was actually also a comment added. We need to have research and development to be able to actually produce locally. We cannot just do it like this. Yeah, we need the knowledge first. We need the know-how. So this must be a part, an integral part of the whole localization process, is get the knowledge. And here we also see then a list which was made up after this whole, of the return of all these inputs from the governors of the provinces, where we also see here some examples of turning machines, drilling machines, grinding machines, what is the current share of import and what shall be the future share of imports. Here we have not very extreme examples. Here we go from 95, for instance, to 69, or from 80 to 61, so not that massive. State tenders. So, as I've already mentioned, quite a lot of goods shall be excluded from state tenders automatically. For instance, we have here an example with foreign drugs, which are life-saving, yes. If there are a minimum of 2 companies taking part in a tender with production in Russia, no foreign tenderers shall be allowed to the tender. There are decrees which go a little bit into the same direction, 791 or 656. 656 is for automobile producers, 791 is light industry, textile industry. So here, very, very strict rules. And then we have a special investment agreement, and here I hand over to Kevin.
So also from my side, good day everybody. Obviously the special investment agreement is indeed a tool from the law on industrial policy in the Russian Federation. And in fact it's concluded between an investor and the Russian Federation himself. This is like a representative body. So-called Minpромtorg is the Ministry for Industry and Production. And basically the investor commits himself to establish a production or modernize a already existing production in Russia. And of course also within a time frame, and also the deadline for the product launch or the finishing of the construction period will be also determined in the contract. But actually what is more interesting is that in the contract also details to the how far the degree of localization shall be can be defined. So everything now what Andreas said, that there are certain standards defined by law to which degree the the producer shall produce can be now renegotiated. So basically, as I already said, there are three types of possible subjects. Either to create from scratch a production facility or modernize it, or just to introduce a new technology, or even to start production of a product which has no similarities or no alternative on the market. So here the Russian Federation would be ready to conclude such a special investment contract. And again, now we see again the same industries as Andreas already mentioned, which are also subject in the import substitution plan. And for those industries, such a agreement can be concluded. Maybe here also a brief overview. What is very interesting, that the minimum amount of investment shall be not less than 750 million rubles, which is by today around about 10 or 10.5 million euro. And maximum time of the contract can be up to 10 years. And now here again, the advantage of such a contract would be that the state guarantee a simplification of the process to get actually the label made in Russia. So because the label made in Russia then ensures that you can take part in public tenders if the investor would wish to do so. And then, of course, there are also tax benefits, the reduction of the federal tax from 2% on 0%, and also some possibilities of increased depreciation of the fixed assets. But there's also one very important point. In case one project is more than 3 billion rubles, so that means more than 40 million euro at this time or at this very moment, then actually the Russian Federation says, okay, we can buy from you maximum 30% of the produced volume that is stated in the contract. But I emphasize we can. So a minimum amount is not stated, but the maximum amount is restricted up to 30%. So, and now is the question, who actually signs such an agreement? So what is now the status? So the very first company who signed such a special investment agreement was the German company Claas. They are producing harvesters. Later on we will share this example with more details. And the contract was signed during the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg in July. And actually only today is Tuesday, so last week the contract was signed with Mazda Solos and the Russian Federation, also an amount of, I guess, 30 million euro. But this example we also have later on. Then we go further now with the definition. Actually, what does it mean, made in Russia. Andreas?
So, for a good to be recognized as made in Russia, in the very first place, if there is an investment agreement, special investment agreement in force, as we have just heard from Kevin, then this is the most important part. So if it's written down there, it's considered made in Russia. If this is not the case, and it is the case only with 2 companies or 3 companies, Kevin? 2? But many more in the waiting line. But if this is not the case with the vast majority of the other companies, there are other criteria that are being used. So there is Decree 719, which I've already mentioned before. Yes. Here in this decree, there is covered photonics and the lighting industry, electrical engineering, electric power industry, heavy machines industry, machine tool, automotive industry, and also special machinery industry. So if this decree covers a certain product or product group, it shall be defined according to this decree. If there is another decree, and there are quite a number of other decrees, especially also concerning the pharmaceutical sector, if they cover a special product or product group, this shall be the definition criteria. Anything not covered by special decrees, for these there is a CIS agreement is named from 2009, which is in place still and which shall be used for any other remaining products. So, if we have this decree 719, yeah, we have no clear or not just one concrete criteria what makes a product locally produced, what makes a product made in Russia. There are several variants, yes? One of the variants is, for instance, percentage share of the cost of foreign raw materials and components in the price of the final product, yes? That's one variant. Another variant is performance of certain production operations of certain processes in Russia. Or also that the manufacturer has the right of the product's design and technical documentation. And a fourth criteria which might be used is whether the producer has a service center in Russia or in the Eurasian Economic Union. Okay, 4 possible criterias. What can we do with this? We have to go deeper into this Decree 719 or other decrees applicable, but this is the most important and biggest one, and really check by the number of the product what the product is there and what is the criteria. For instance, we will afterwards go to an example of the automobile industry. What are the criteria there? If we have just passenger cars, yes, there we have in the list certain processes. The processes are installation of powertrain, front and rear suspension, exhaust system, steering gear, electric equipment, interior parts, exterior parts, welding, car body painting, car body assembly, checkout tests of the finished vehicles. So that's around about 11 processes, if I have counted right. Actually, I thought it should be 12. And this decree says for the cars to be considered made in Russia, in 2015, 7 just had to be made in Russia. By 2016, already 9. And starting from 2017, 11 operations to be made in Russia. So if it's just 10 operations, the car cannot be considered made in Russia. So this is an example of having just the definition by the processes. And if there is a product considered made in Russia, the customs tariff number will change. So the first 4 positions of the number look different. There are certain technical requirements for the production processes, sufficient processing. So in case there is a certain process, also in this process, it is important that the majority of a process is made in Russia, and not just a part of it. Yes. And there are requirements for imported components, materials. Only certain materials are allowed. Not everything is allowed. There are some materials that have to be 100% purchased in Russia. The ad valorem value is clear. There is a maximum value of imported materials of the finished good. This is according to the CIS agreement. If we have HS Group 87 parts of vehicles, here we have an ad valorem value, so at least 50% of the product value should be added in Russia. If we have the HS code group 39, plastics, here we have 80% of the ad valorem value should be added in Russia, so quite a lot. If we take another example, when we have microwaves with the HS code, as you can see here, the required production processes that should be made in Russia are manufacturing of the body, manufacture of electrical components, assembly and installation of the blocks, and regulation and control of parameters and options. So here with the microwaves, it's not an ad valorem rule, but rather it is the required processes that have to be made in Russia. So the essence of this is we really have to look for each product individually in the lists, what is required for this, for your specific product, whether it is considered made in Russia or not. When we look a bit closer at the automotive industry, here there is a decree from the year 2010, which guarantees the car producers 0 or to maximum 5% customs duties for import of components. And to be able to get this 0 to 5% customs duty rates, there are some criteria that had to be fulfilled. According to this decree, there had to be a special investment agreement signed with the state, 60% of local production within 6 years, and this is very interesting, production of a minimum of 300,000 units. In case of a new production facility, 350,000 units per year for modernizing production facilities to be under this criteria. So that's vast numbers. We will afterwards quickly see what are the numbers of sold cars in Russia. For 2016, we expect around about 1.4 million. So in 2010, people were thinking in slightly different spheres because they were expecting that the car market would just grow, and would reach the status of actually being the biggest car market all over Europe. Now we are in a little bit different spheres. So the numbers 300,000, 350,000, that's probably not really applicable anymore. Times have changed. But anyway, if these 60% of localization of the car producers have to be achieved, this also means that the car component manufacturers have to localize. So the car component manufacturers have to localize around about 30 to 45% of their production so that they can sell to the automobile producers, and the automobile producers can still reach the 60% of local content. And what we see now in the Russian car market, the market is dominated by foreign producers. Insofar, we can say the whole localization, the steps of the government to localize the car producers is actually quite much of a success story, because we have had lots and lots of investments of foreign car producers. The market is dominated by foreign producers. Why is that so? They have brought not only their products, but they have also brought their processes, just in time and so on, efficiency. And doing that also coupled with different design, with different performance, the Russian producers have somehow got smaller and smaller and smaller. So their share has become smaller. There still is, of course, the Russian car producers AvtoVAZ. There is KAMAZ with the lorries. But AvtoVAZ is, for instance, owned by Renault-Nissan by more than 50%. So there also this very traditional Russian car producer is actually by a majority in foreign hands. And we see here on this map where are the car producers actually located. We have certain focus area. If we look on the left top, we see the area of St. Petersburg with quite some car producers, Hyundai, Nissan, Toyota, MAN, Scania. MAN Scania is by now one. Right under it, we see the car producers in Kaliningrad, BMW with a joint venture. There is Kia, there is Hyundai also. And we also see two car producers cut out. It's General Motors Group, which have closed their production in St. Petersburg. However, many think like, okay, General Motors has closed because the economy is so bad. I wouldn't fully agree. I think there's also internal reasons and management reasons why they have run into these big difficulties, why they have sold so little cars in Russia, and not only in Russia. And we see further to the right also other automobile clusters, Naberezhny Chelny, Yelabuga, Izhevsk, and then a bit further down, Ulyanovsk, Tolyatti, with also some local Russian producers. And we see south of Moscow the region Kaluga. Probably everybody of you has already heard of it. There is a Volkswagen, Skoda, Peugeot, Mitsubishi, Volvo, and Citroën who are producing in Kaluga region. And by now in the Kaluga region, there have been so many car producers that it's actually difficult now for new arrivals to find staff at reasonable prices. So Kaluga region is by many now considered as not the best place anymore to invest due to HR restrictions. So, as we have already mentioned, the government agencies, anything connected to the state, they are not allowed to buy any more foreign vehicles. This also has now, for instance, an impact on Mercedes. They have recently decided to also produce their limousines in Russia. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to sell them anymore to Russian officials, and Russian officials like Mercedes for sure. And the idea is by 2018, 60% of the local content in the overall car market in Russia should be made in Russia. And if we now look at the figures, what I've mentioned before, the sales of cars in Russia in 2012, we had almost 3 million vehicles. And everybody expected like by 2013 or 2014 they would overtake Germany as the biggest car market in Europe. This has not happened. Already in 2013 the market went down by a little bit more than 5%. It went down by more than 10% in 2014, and it went down by a bit more than a third in 2015. For 2016 we are still in negative territory, around about 5 to 10% less cars sold in Russia compared to 2015, with around about 1.4 million. So more than 50% less than in 2012. That's massive. In this wonderful table, we see also a result of the localization politics in Russia. We see the most popular models and where they were produced. So the most popular model is Hyundai Solaris. In 2015, here we have the figures, January to June. They were produced in St. Petersburg. We have the Lada Granta in Izhevsk. We have Kia Rio, also St. Petersburg. And we have further producers, all from Russia. So the top 9 cars are all produced in Russia. So we see localization of production can work. In the pharmaceutical industry, this is another focus industry of the Russian government. The idea is that by 2020, 90% of so-called life-saving drugs shall be produced in Russia. It's altogether a list of 601 drugs. There is also the idea to increase the competitiveness of the local pharmaceutical industry by actually adjusting a little bit the quality standards to international standards, so the producers don't have to adjust their whole production processes to Russia, but can rather use the international processes and leverage them. In the end, if we look at the total market of drugs in Russia, more than 50% of all the drugs should be produced in Russia. There is also a system of state subsidies for setup and manufacturing capacities, and also research and development centers. And there should be an improvement of quality controls, coupled with a reduction of administrative barriers. So, if there is a state tender for life-saving drugs, there is a rule: if there are 2 producers producing in the Eurasian Economic Union, no foreign participants in a tender allowed, as already mentioned. Now, the rules are not so strict yet. Yeah? So quite a number of companies do simple repackaging of pills, and the pills are then also considered made in Russia. The rules are changing now, so 1st of January 2017, this is definitely not going to be possible anymore. So those who just do repackaging have to do some more of their production steps in Russia. And maybe you've also heard of the 15% penalty. No one heard? So when there are not 2 local producers from the Eurasian Economic Union, if there is only 1, and there are foreign competitors taking part in a tender, and the foreign competitor wins, the price the foreign competitor offers is automatically reduced by 15%. Whether they want or not, it's an automatic mechanism. So this also helps, of course, the local producers to have bigger chances in tenders. Investment areas in Russia. Here I hand over the word to Kevin again.
So before I switch to the next slide, I guess it makes sense to provide you with a couple of informations, let's say from the history from Russia, to understand why we actually today have the investment areas in Russia as we have them. So maybe if you think back after the perestroika and after the so-called wild 90s, the privatization area, a lot of, let's say, private people, they got their flats. Also companies were transferred to private people. Some persons somehow got very rich, other people got very poor. And of course, after the 90s, this period ended with a huge boom. Maybe you remember in 2003 and 2004, the so-called Yukos case with Mikhail Khodorkovsky, one, let's say, to make it political, the one side said that Khodorkovsky got control of the company illegally during the wild 90s. On the other hand, it's said that he acquired the company legally, and then in 2000, when Vladimir Putin came into force, the government, they tried to get back control of the lost key industries. This was oil and gas, and they somehow forced the owners out of the companies. So that's a point for political discussion, but not up to now. But I just wanted to say that in the beginning of the 2000s, also domestic investments and also foreign investments sharply decreased, because still there was now the uncertainty of property, because the property rights were at risk. And now the Russian government, even already in the beginning of 2000s, they already wanted to change this picture. So if we now imagine if we had been an investor before 2005, why 2005, I will explain this a bit later, what actually opportunity did you have in Russia? Basically, there was only one. You just go to Russia, you search for a land plot, either greenfield or brownfield, and then you can choose, maybe you have a partner whom you will trust. A lot of companies did so, and they failed. They paid a lot of money for that, because they thought, okay, Russian business partners we can trust, and everything will be fine. Other companies chose the other way around and spent a lot of money to consultants, auditors, which was very necessary. And this both in this 2 points, in fact, led to the situation that anyway foreign investors and were struggling to invest in Russia. So here the Russian government early in the 2000s already said that they want to create an investment environment easily for the market access entrance, and make fair legislation. So what do we have today? Or maybe just go one slide back. What is very important when you actually bought your land plot? I mean, the critical point was always in the utility sector, because there was high corruption, and then of course also in the construction documentation. And one point which led out of that was that the Russian government said, okay, now we want to create zones where the investor just comes, gets his land plot, everything is ready, and then he can already start the construction. Papers will be ready, so very easy. And today we have, after why 2005, in 2005 Vladimir Putin signed the so-called Special Economic Zone Act, and actually after this industrial and investment areas were created. I would even say nowadays we have even too many investment areas in Russia. Vladimir Putin, maybe you read in June, the beginning of June this year, mentioned that from the current existing 33 special economic zone, they are going to close 11. So now that's why we have here 22 operating special economic zones. We have more than 147 operating industrial parks, plus even 34 in the planning phase. And this only takes those parks into consideration which either already comply with the national standard for industrial parks, or which are even close to the national standard parks. Then we also have so-called techno parks, 36 of them, 59 private industrial clusters handled by Minpромtorg, 26 governmental industrial clusters handled by another authority, and then now the new upcoming 3 territories of distant social economic development. They are so-called TOR. That's basically to improve the economy and also the whole overall population in the Far East. Basically, in these TOR zones, even the Russian Federation offers land for free. of course under certain circumstances. And then we have many other types of areas or variations, like for example business incubators, business accelerators, technology transfer centers, and so on and so forth. So there are huge, vast amount of possibilities. So as I already said, in 2005, Putin signed this contract, and then what we actually have today in the special economic zone is that you can take benefit, or that you benefit from a reduced tax system. You have the infrastructure there, so that means you have access to street or railroad or even shipway, so that means the port is ready. The state guarantees steady conditions in all special economic zone until 2054. So that means when the act was signed by Putin, this were 49 years. In most of the special economic zones, there you won't have to pay any customs and no tax on import. In most cases, the customs facilities, they are already on the spot. So customs clearance can already be done in the zone itself. And then, of course, attractive pricing for land plots. And there is no possibility of rent. It's only sales of land plots. And then here what is very important, one window principle. So that means in the special economic zone, there's always a management company who takes care of the overall organization of the bureaucratical procedures. So you don't need to send your people to dozens or thousands of different authorities. So if we have a look at the card, so we see that we have first of all 4 different types of special economic zones, so related to industry and production, high-tech and innovation, logistics and tourism. For example, in St. Petersburg, we have the high-tech and innovation special economic zone, where most of them is, let's say, where the core is pharmaceutical companies, for example, like Novartis or Vertex, or Biocat, one of the biggest Russian pharmaceutical companies. And as we also can see is that most of the zones, they are located in the European part of Russia. So that means also when you look a bit to the right, Far East is far not that much developed, and everything what is green in the south is only tourism and leisure. So this is maybe a brief overview about the tax benefits. Maybe I won't go now too much into details, but the fact is that the regional so the profit tax, if you just have a brief look at the profit tax, which is overall 20% existing from 2% federal tax and then 18% regional budget, it can be decreased up to 0% for a certain amount of time. That's basically a very important fact. And then also custom-free imports for 49 years. So, and all those tax, then depending on the special economic zone, up to 10 years valid. And also the state guarantees that those conditions will stay until 2054. Now, talking about industrial and techno parks. So basically what is the difference is that in the industrial parks, you will probably have, or not probably, but you will have production, storage, logistics company. So that means companies which are creating value. And then there are also so-called techno parks. This means they're more or less for R&D, scientific research centers. And most of the time on those technological parks, you will also have a link to the educational system. So maybe an outpost from a university is there, and most likely the students which are working in this, let's say, outpost or in this office from the university become later on employees of the residents. Now, only talking about industrial parks, not techno parks, only industrial parks. So we have now 147 in operations. We have more than 1,870 residents. And as you can see, the occupation rate is still 53% in 2016. Those numbers are the latest numbers from one of the Association for Industrial Parks who did a research. on industrial parks. So basically we can see that in the last 2 years, the space of, like, the offered space of for the industrial parks increased, but still there's way to go to actually come up to 80% or 90% occupation rate. So there's still a lot of space, and I hope today we found some of you who will close that gap. So until now, or let's say until today, around about 8.2 billion euros have been invested in those regional industrial parks. And as we can see, the shareholdership, which basically only means the management company who takes care of the industrial parks, is around about 50-50. So we have here 76 private management companies and 71 governmental companies managed. And also here again, from 147 industrial parks, we have 125 in the European part. So Far East is not, until now, also here not that much developed. Maybe now let's have a brief look into the Moscow region. Everything what is red, what you can see from there, because maybe you cannot read it, these are industrial parks. So we have here 14 operating industrial parks, and there are still 4 to come. And also 9 other industrial parks are located near the border and even not far away. And then already 200 kilometers until the Kaluga region. Shall I click this away? All right. All right, so Kaluga region, and then to the next bigger city, industry cluster, so it's not very far away. For St. Petersburg, basically in St. Petersburg itself, so St. Petersburg, for the government, let's say the legal area from St. Petersburg, there actually we do not have that many. We have 1 operating industrial park. Andreas and I, we even went there and had a look at that. The Marino Park, also in a very good shape, but still it shows the same numbers as we had, the occupation rate even under 50%. And 3 industrial parks are still under construction but operating. When we say under construction but operating, means that residents are already there, they already started the construction, but basically infrastructure, maybe streets or the final meter of the gas electricity connection is not, or has not been done yet. And then of course here the Leningrad region, which is of course not totally covered on this picture, has far more industrial parks. And then, because I already said, the Association of Industrial Parks. So in case you consider to research some industrial parks in Russia, and then you will find that your subject or your prospective park claims that they are a member of the Association of Industrial Parks and that they are certified, then this is actually already a good sign. Basically, the Association of Industrial Parks is a kind of network where the industrial parks are members at, and they are also the official auditor and certifier for the national standard for industrial parks. So that means when you have a park which has this certification, then you can be assured that the park is minimum 8 hectares, like the size is minimum 8 hectares. You have an engineering infrastructure ready, streets are ready. And how does that work? The Association of Industrial Parks, they just send really experts into the park and then checking also the physical status of the park. What the Association of Industrial Parks also does is a lot of networking. So, for example, here, as we can see, by all they have, I believe, 150 members, and within 87 industrial parks, and the other members are actually companies which can help potential investors to fulfill, to fulfill their projects. So we have here Ernst & Young, for example, or any other construction companies who can do the rollout. And here, as the Association of Industrial Parks serves as a network. And then basically the same we have for the technoparks and the clusters. Basically here also we have a national standard. So that means technoparks which claims they are certified with the technological standard. Here you can be sure is, I would put it like in a political term, in a neutral way, but it says that they have minimum 5,000 square meters, so that means here's enough space for you, and that minimum 50% of all residents are SMEs. If it is less, so that means you will never find a techno park where only one resident is. You will have small and middle-sized enterprises there. Here we have one industrial park in the Leningrad region where also Andreas and I went to. Here we have residents, foreign residents, Siemens, Ponce, it's a Finnish company, Petit Product, Gorigo and Dermosil. Basically what we can see here is that those park is, for example, already occupied, I believe, for 70%, also in a very good shape. Better than we expected before we came there. Here the same industrial park Stupino. Some of our colleagues went there. They already got acquainted there also with the management company. And here we also had already some talks with the company Knauf, which we also later on will mention in one of our examples. Campina, Mapei, Marazzi, Mars and Mars Pet Food, and Kimberly Clark. So, and maybe now we go back to the promising industries, which will now Andreas say a couple of words about that.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing when we visited these industrial parks, special economic zones, the very interesting thing is when they have huge occupation rates, but in fact you don't find that much on place. So when you look at the occupation rates of all these parks, on average they are impressive, but you come there and you see there's a lot of empty land. You just ask them, what has happened? Where are these companies? You claim everything is full, you don't have space. Well, there are a lot of companies registered, right? But they have not started to do anything. They are then obliged to start the construction of their, well, production usually, or of their buildings or whatever, within 3 years. If they don't, they lose the right to be in the industrial park or in the special economic zone. So this is then what usually happens. So sometimes there are probably companies registered just for fun, just to improve the statistics a little bit. So, promising industries, we have already had a look at two of them, pharmaceutical and automobile industry. We've already had a look. Further interesting industries, agricultural industry, of course. We have currently the counter sanctions in place from Russia against most Western countries, not Switzerland, fortunately, so we can still export our cheese. The problem just is that it's a little bit too expensive. Then information technology. Here, of course, we have legislation on the storage of personal data. So personal data has to be stored on the territory of the Russian Federation. This, of course, is a kind of can give a kind of boost to the producers. Then in pharmaceutical industries, we have already gone through, there is quite a lot of incentives actually to produce locally, otherwise companies are simply pushed out of the market. Machinery industry, Here, of course, with all these plans of import substitutions, there is going to be a big demand for machinery. It cannot be just like this, that the machinery can be produced locally. If you want to produce products locally, you need to get the machinery still from abroad to quite some degree. With construction materials, yes, of course, there is a big potential in construction sector. Infrastructure has to be improved massively within the next decades. And automobile industry, we have already talked about the plans. So, with agriculture and nutrition, we have a level of self-sufficiency with groceries in 2015, we've reached 88%. In 2010, we reached only 80%. So the production locally has increased massively. The other side of the story is that the investments have not increased massively. So in the end, what we see is using the capacities to a higher extent, but not investing too much into new capacities.
Maybe what is also interesting to add from our experience, we have one of our clients is producing potato chips, and for example, they claim they have huge problems actually to find the right potatoes actually on the Russian market. So anyway, that here is written that potatoes are now 97% produced. But for example, for those food processing companies, those 97% potatoes, most of the potatoes, they are not the right potatoes. So anyway, companies are forced to import potatoes from other countries.
In the special case of crisp production, they need to have a certain size and a certain form. So not so easy to find them, so they still try to import from all over. Also very interesting fact, what is also quite often in the Russian media, the cheese production has improved massively in Russia, whereas the milk production has not. So what has happened? There is this wonderful alternative to milk. It's named palm oil. So that's what is added to cheese, and this doesn't really add to good quality. So there is a certain quality issue here. Information technology, as I mentioned, there is a new law, or not that new anymore, it's from 2015. It's already in force, that personal data has to be stored in Russia. But that's not the only incentive. There are other incentives of producing software locally. We've already talked about it quickly. And there are quite a big number of good software specialists available in Russia, especially in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Novosibirsk, also Nizhny Novgorod. We also see quite a big number of foreign companies coming in, working with us. Where we are always also trying to get some tax incentives, because there are also tax incentive programs in place from the government to actually get especially software developers to Russia. And also Russia, Ukraine and Belarus have become a little bit of an alternative to what was formerly given to India, nearshoring, IT services. So in India, it's getting more and more difficult to find the right specialists at reasonable prices. In Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, it's still possible. And we have less language barriers than with Indian IT companies. Pharmaceutical industry, yeah, we have mentioned it. In many cases, it's a very simple question. Either you produce locally or you're kicked out of the market. When we afterwards also look at Novartis, they were also in such a situation, having quite a good share. They are one of probably the biggest player on the Russian market of drugs, and for them it was very, very clear. Either they have to produce locally or they lose their market share. And not only investing in production capacities, but also in R&D capacities. However, if you talk to the people in Novartis, they will tell you that there is not much R&D. This is rather on the paper than in reality. Machine engineering, we have mentioned it, tremendous demand due to the modernization. So here there is also quite some opportunities for Swiss companies to export and maybe to also produce later on locally in Russia. We have infrastructure. I mean, if you looked at the whole infrastructure, road infrastructure, buildings, whatever, you see there is a big need for investment. So a lot has to be invested, a lot has to be renewed and renovated. Due to the current economic crisis, of course, many projects have been stopped, frozen, postponed, whatever. Also, there were quite a lot of projects connected to the Football World Championship 2018. Many of them have also been cancelled, but still there is quite some opportunities in such big projects to actually get a share. We see here on the picture down left, actually a pretty sad story. It's the stadium in St. Petersburg, which has already been in the process of being built for 9 years. It's not finished yet, and once it's finished, it's probably going to be the most expensive stadium in the world. But hopefully next summer for the Confederations Cup it's going to be ready. Then we have new airport in Rostov. We have bridges in Nizhny Novgorod. We have lots of projects in Far East. So the government is putting a lot of money into this. We also have motorway projects between Moscow and Nizhny Novgorod, Samara. Further to the south, we have roads construction to St. Petersburg. We have railroad construction. So there's quite a lot going on in this area. Automobile industry, yes, we've mentioned it. We don't have to go into that again. And if we look at the motivation of certain investors, why they invested in Russia, for Volkswagen in Kaluga, it's mainly the low taxes, it's duty-free imports that were guaranteed by the government, which made them invest there. For the producer of harvesters class, mainly it was to really get the label made in Russia to be able to compete with a big Russian competitor. And this Russian competitor did a lot, this Rossielmash in Rostov, they did a lot to actually compete with class, to get the barriers higher and higher, to be admitted as a local producers. But finally class has managed to be also considered local producer. Class is also an interesting example because they have not only started to produce locally and for the local market, but also to export. So they export some parts that they produce, they export to the headquarters in Germany. For Zollers, they have Fiesta models from Yelabuga that they export also to Kazakhstan. So that's also a very good example. There is Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte. They also started to export more and more of fridges into other countries. There is a Hyundai exporting to Egypt and Lebanon. And another company we know pretty well, Astron, they have made quite big parts for a project in Algeria. They produced in Yaroslavl. So more and more we also see companies not only want to produce for the local market, but rather also export. And maybe some examples of localization that we have seen within the last couple of years, or that are going on, or that are going to come. Here's a quick overview. Maybe we start with DMG Mori, company with European headquarters in Winterthur, if I'm right. They have started construction in 2012 in Ulyanovsk area. They have gone into one of these industrial parks, Savolshye, and invested about 70 million euros. The launch of production was supposed to be in September 2015. To the best of my knowledge, they have not started yet, and they produce turning lathe milling machines.
So now we have a Swiss company, Mobatime. They are actually already on the market in St. Petersburg since 2003, and what they basically did was they wanted to produce components for clocks and watch systems in St. Petersburg. So in 2010 they found a facility and successfully finished this construction, so-called mobile house now. But what they faced was that they could only occupy the facility only partly, and that's why they took the decision to form a so-called like technological park, so where other companies can come into the mobile house for a certain period of time and then, for example, develop their certain products. And this is actually also a very good example which is pretty much successful even in the time of crisis. Mobatime shared this part of their facility already, I suppose, with 6 or 7 different companies. So pretty much successful.
Then we have Siemens turbines, gas turbine systems. One of the lighthouse projects within the last couple of years in St. Petersburg area. They started in 2013 and finished production in June last year. Invested around about 120 million euros, and they produce really big gas turbine systems, between 6 and 10 pieces each year. And for them, it was also a matter of staying in the market or leaving the market. So without local production, they would just leave the market to somebody else. Now they don't really use the capacity for their own production, for their own projects in Russia, but they rather now have taken over some of the capacity for other countries. So it's a kind of cannibalization effect, actually, because the market in Russia is not big enough yet.
So this is Mazda Solos, as I already mentioned. They just shortly signed this special investment agreement, and this was regarding a production facility in Vladivostok, where they committed themselves to produce 50,000 engines for the models CX and 5 and 6. And basically why they did this was actually they were already obliged to put this production in place already in the last year, in 2015, but they didn't fulfill the deadline. So now it's getting expensive for them, because this project, which was supposed to be fulfilled last year, this came hand in hand with free customs fee, and now, as the production is not established, now the company has to pay, I suppose, 15% on the import on the engines and components, and in 2018 probably they this will be then again be in force, so that they don't have to pay the import customs. So that means, like, when then this project is fulfilled, import customs will then also again will be suspended.
Novartis, we've already mentioned, the big Swiss project in Russia within the last years, producing in St. Petersburg pills for under the brand Sondo. Investments of around about 4.5 billion rubles. Actually, the initial plan was a lot higher, but they might invest more in the future with further construction phases. So the output, yeah, generic drugs with the Sondo brand.
Yeah, then Smurfit Kappa, a Irish company for packaging solutions. Actually, the first investor in the Leningrad region, already there for now almost 20 years, so 18 years, basically. And what they actually already have been through is through 3 investment agreements with the region. And basically why they went to St. Petersburg, to the eastern part, because in the eastern part, former soldiers which were stationed in Germany, they just came back to the eastern part of St. Petersburg. And due to this advantage for labor force, Smurfit Kappa chose this investment area there. And today they are very successful on the market. They have a market share for let's say in the food area for, if I'm not mistaken, 70%. Yep.
Company class we've already mentioned. Start of construction 2013, and then last October they went into production in Krasnodar, so in the south, with harvesters, around about 120 million euros invested, but actually they had invested in production before, so for them it was just a continuation, and they also confirmed they will further invest in Russia.
So Bosch as well started their construction in 2013. Basically also one example for investments into an industrial parks in the form of 1.5 billion rubles. And here the output we can see is ESP and AB systems for passenger cars. And the launch of production was successful, so now the production facility is running.
Knauf, actually an example of a company which has invested heavily in Russia for the last around about 15 years. They have many production facilities, so the one we show here is just another one near Samara with another 1.25 billion rubles of investments, but they have around about 10 or 12 plants all over Russia. For them, the Russian market has become, if I'm right, the second biggest market, and about to actually also take over Germany as the most important. So for them, Russian market, very important, very good example of very successful localization. Bionorica. This is a company that has also started to produce in Russia already quite some time ago. They already have a production facility in Noginsk, as you probably know. They produce drugs there, over-the-counter drugs. Now they have a new project in Voronezh, so further south, which is going to start in 2017 and should produce the first drugs in 2019 or 2020.
Then Lifan, the Chinese company, launched. Actually, here the launch of the production was postponed for another year. Actually, it was already planned for this year, but due to the economical development and the, let's say, badly consumption of cars, they also were forced to postpone the launch of the production. So, but as we can see here, they are residents of the Federal Special Economic Zone in Lipetsk, and with an investment volume of $300 million for passenger cars.
And with Great Wall, around about the same story. They are in the industrial park in Tula, which is named Uslovaya, with an investment of around about $500 million. Huge investments, production of SUVs, which are very popular in Russia. Here also the launch of production has been postponed due to the current not so easy economic situation.
Then Jockey Plastic from, if I'm not mistaken, Gummersbach, it's near Köln. They also launched their production last year. And here we also see an investment of 15 million euros for plastic containers. And they are also already very long on the market, I guess for more than 10 years now.
And another example from pharmaceutical industry, Novo Nordisk. So it's one of the companies that would also kind of trying to build up the pharmaceutical cluster, which is one of the goals of the Russian government. So they have started production in 2015 with insulin drugs near Kaluga, around about $100 million investment.
And then the last but not the least, of course, the German frontrunner Volkswagen, with the launch of the production of in September 2015, in an investment volume of 250 million for engines for VW and Skoda. I suppose not only in Kaluga, but also on the card we had Volkswagen somewhere else, right? I suppose. I guess it's already the second. It's the second location where VW is now located. So also very, very successful on the Russian market. And even VW Polo, a very famous car in Russia. All the Russians pretty much love Volkswagen.
Apart from these projects which were launched or which have already come into, which are already active or planned, there has also been quite a number of frozen projects. For instance, Mercedes-Benz with construction in Vladimir, they had plans. This has now been actually cancelled at this location as far as I know, but they want to produce in a different place. But they will produce for sure because they have to, otherwise they lose the market. BMW postponed the construction of a car manufacturer in Kaliningrad region May last year. They of course they produce there. They produce in Kaliningrad together with a Russian joint venture partner, and they produce successfully. But they are also a little bit afraid to invest. Then one of my former employers, Swiss Chrono Group, they have already postponed the building of a new plant in Perm area for quite a while. Now they talk about 2017. Then General Motors Avtovaz, a joint venture, also postponed the construction of a press cut and welding plant for car bodies for the Niva, Chevrolet Niva. This should have been in Togliatti. And in Lafarge, well, Lafarge is now Holcim Lafarge, yes, stopped the construction of a cement factory in the Rostov area. Actually, the cement market in Russia has suffered really a lot during the economic crisis, so that's quite understandable. So, we have already almost used up the time.
Sorry to interrupt you quickly. We have here an expert who builds business parks in Russia. We have seen these are giants which invest. Switzerland, 99.9% are SMEs. What's your experience? Do you have SMEs, typical SMEs in your business parks? Okay. Mr. Waits from...
I'm Heinz Waits. I'm representing the Dega Group building business parks in Russia. The companies we have accompanied for the construction that became final customers are not really small, middle and small companies. Rather, most of them were or are German groups quoted on the exchange, like E.ON, Siemens, Merck, and other companies, but smaller ones. Not yet.
So, two reasons. Why, and what should they do, or necessity?
Well,
working with tenders.
I think for the smaller companies, they may. That's what I think personally. They don't have the contacts, and they have a certain fear towards the Russian mentality, fears towards legal systems, and that is why actually we are here in Switzerland as a bridge to to fill in this gap of knowledge that middle and small companies wouldn't have.
We have here two big companies, Seront or Schaubling. I don't know if they have plans, but they would be potential customers.
I would be happy to meet them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think one example in the industrial park in Noginsk is one of the companies I also mentioned, Bionorica. They started there somewhere in 2009, something like that. I mean, Bionorica is not a huge company, but still, yes, it's considerable size, and they invested, I think, around about 15 to 20 million in the production in the Dega park in Noginsk. So we have 7 minutes left, and we have one subject left, which is named import and certification. Maybe we'll just leave that out. For those who are interested in import and certification, please feel free to approach us anytime, right afterwards, or via phone or email. And I would like to rather give you an opportunity to ask questions, if there are questions. Don't be shy.
I've seen in one of your slides that there was a status of special sole supplier status. Can you elaborate about this?
Yes, this I can. So it's related to the special investment agreement. The sole supplier status is given from the Russian Federation when your investment volume is more than 3 billion rubles. So in this case, like 40 million euro. And this basically only says that you are one of the sole suppliers, let's say one of the single suppliers for the Russian Federation. Because then with this status, the Russian Federation can buy maximum 30% of the production output. So basically, that's it. But unfortunately, as I already said, there is unfortunately no minimum stated, and I suppose this is subject to negotiation with the Russian Federation.
And I should start as a co-organizer by thanking you warmly for this very comprehensive and highly detailed presentation. It's probably for some of us an eyes-opener, and for people that have a knowledge with Russia, again, an additional layer of information. So thank you again. One question, you know that Geneva is a home to the WTO, and I'd like to have your views on how these highly protectionist measures comply with the provisions of the WTO. We're taking here more of a macro view, but Russia has boosted its presence here in Geneva with a full-fledged trade mission to the WTO, which is very well known to us. Are you aware of any challenges by other jurisdictions on these measures and potential infringements of most favored nation clause and the like?
Thank you for the question. Actually, a question we hear again and again, because of course many ask themselves, why actually did Russia join the WTO if soon after there are so many steps taken to actually shut down the country to foreign markets? I don't know exactly the legislation of the WTO, but as long as there is an economic union, as the Eurasian Economic Union, yes, you are allowed to have a beneficial status for the members of that union. How far this really goes, I don't know. The other question is what is actually the impact of the WTO on the Russian import duties. There we see quite a big impact. Import duties have gone down massively. That's one of the slides which I did not show you, but maybe I can show now. Yes. If we see here for automobiles, from 35 to 15% down, for construction equipment from 25 to 10, jet engines 10 to 5, microchips even to 0. So something has been going on, yes. And when it comes to actually claims of other countries, of, for instance, the European Union, why not? I can well imagine that this is going to happen. It's probably a matter of time, and I see there is one case in steel exports. I think there is steel dumping claims going on against Russia. It's probably a matter of time until more claims are going to come. Interestingly, in the Russian government there is now the opinion coming out more and more. We should not only localize for the local consumption, but we have to export. This is what we have to achieve with localization. Absolutely true, but how long are other countries going to accept taking imports from Russia, but not being allowed to export to Russia? So it's probably a conflict situation in the future, yes. More questions? No questions. Otherwise, we will be available afterwards also by a cup of coffee or a glass of water. Then I would just like to quickly wrap up with some conclusions. Opportunities and risks of localization. Opportunities, lower investment and operating costs due to the ruble devaluation. As you probably know, the ruble, we have also seen it, has gone down massively since 2014. I would see it as an opportunity, but at the same time also as a risk, because assuming the oil price is going up again to whatever, $80 a barrel, this advantage is going to be wiped out quickly. So I wouldn't be, or I wouldn't let my business be driven by this too much. Then there is the potential for export. That's what we have just discussed. Primarily export to the other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. There are quite good tax incentives in certain industries. You have to know how to make use of them. Then, if you get the status of a local producer, you're not discriminated in state tenders, whereas as non-local producers, we've seen it, it's going to be difficult. Politicians are currently quite open to foreign investors because there aren't many, and we know from the past it hasn't always been like that. Also, if you look at the big cities, they were sometimes actually pretty cold to foreign investors unless a project had really a big volume. Now this is a bit different. And actually, very interesting point, opportunity to be the first mover in a niche. The whole set of legislation for industrial policy would, according to the text of the law on industrial policy, would actually say that it should build up a competitive economy. However, in practice, in some parts, in some markets, in some niches, we have the contrary. We build up monopolies and duopolies. Whether that's good or bad, up to others to decide. But for a foreign investor to profit by this, getting into a niche market, being one or the only or one of the two only producers in a market, means getting higher prices, means getting a monopoly pricing. I think everybody of us learned this in economics for beginners, yes, and if a company has the opportunity to take this, perfect. We have one client, we are currently working on this. They will be happy once they have their production running. Then we have more and more transparency on imports. We have not touched it now with the slides due to lack of time, but here we have more and more electronic procedures, more and more we have transparent processes which also make it easier for companies to check what's going on. Then risk, of course, we have a recession, diminishing purchasing power. Demand on the domestic market has gone down massively, and we have, of course, the sanctions still in place, and we have the danger of import bans on certain parts from abroad. And I write here, for instance, Turkey. We all know what happened when the plane was shot down above Syria or Turkey or whatever. It's a question which we know we will never really know what happened and why this happened. But what was the consequence? The goods from Turkey were banned for import into Russia from one day to the other. And there are companies that just need these parts. For the big companies, it's possible to negotiate with the local authorities to get the ban lifted. We know from Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte, for instance, they have important parts for the production coming in from Turkey. And they told the local government, look, if we don't get these parts, we shut down the company. We cannot produce. 500 people work here, they want to get salaries. So this is how the government actually moved quickly and lifted the ban for these specific products. If it's a smaller company which doesn't have this name, like Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte, it's a bit more difficult. But hopefully now Turkey and Russia are friends again, and everything will be as before. Then price volatility, of course, due to changing exchange rates up and down, yes, can be problematic for many foreign investors. And then the quality of products from local suppliers, a constant issue. Many companies want to have more local suppliers, but it's extremely hard to get them. It's extremely hard to have suppliers that deliver on time and on a constant high quality. But here also we see from big international companies big moves, and they are trying to do something to actually actively support the suppliers, send people to the suppliers to help them producing and to support them to reach a certain level. And then we have also talked about it, the low productivity of the local labor. This also has to become better. So the chosen mix of incentives and limitations will definitely add to further localization of production. How much? Nobody knows, but it will have an impact. But it's, as quite often in Russia it happens, the import substitution plans are a bit over-ambitious probably. I believe in a couple of years, or maybe even in the not such a far future, they have to be cut down a little bit. We have negative impacts, for instance, what we have also seen in the Russian press when it comes to pharmaceutical products. Life-saving drugs which are not available anymore on the Russian market because there are local producers, but the local producers don't produce the same quality, so it might have no effect. And if actually a doctor wants to go around this and purchase the foreign pills, it's against criminal law, so this doctor could end up in jail. It's very simple. So these are the negative, potentially negative impacts of this whole story. In some niches, great opportunities. We've had it. Currently, there are a lot of discussions on the legal framework. Not so many projects actually have been realized. I mean, we've seen some nice projects here. But looking on the macroeconomic scale of the country, the success of the localization so far has been very limited. But there might be more in the future. And then these special economic zones, which Kevin showed us in more details, they are really a good opportunity to settle down without having to cope with getting access to electricity, to water, to gas, which are highly corrupt still. So here you can have everything much easier. Then the temporarily frozen, postponed projects, they will come sometime in the future. the companies who are in Russia, they don't leave Russia, they stay. They downsize for a certain time, but they will stay and they will invest more in the future. And as we have also mentioned, building up manufacturing capacities, you will be very welcome by the local authorities. And, well, once the economy will pick up again, you will be there with your production capacities. So, to put it in a nutshell, invest in Russia and do it with Schneider Group. Thank you. So please feel free to have a couple of coffees, drinks, some foods, and Mark, yes? Wine. Ah, wine, yes, of course. The most important thing, wine.